The pain hit before I registered what happened. One moment I was checking measurements on the building's foundation, clipboard in hand. The next, I was staring at the sky, a crushing weight pinning me to the ground. The sound, metal on bone, would haunt me forever. A sickening crack that told me something inside me had shattered beyond recognition. "Crane cable!" someone shouted. "Get help!" I couldn't move. 300 pounds of steel had collapsed directly onto my left leg and hip. The world narrowed to a pinpoint of blinding agony. I tried to scream but could only produce a ragged wheeze as dust filled my lungs. Workers swarmed around me, their faces blurring together. Someone was pressing something against my leg. Another person cradled my head, telling me not to move. I heard sirens in the distance. "Stay with us, Tess," said a voice I recognized as Remy, one of the junior engineers. "Ambulance is 2 minutes out." I wanted to nod, to say something, but blackness crept in from the edges of my vision. The last thing I saw was the broken crane cable swinging lazily above me, its frayed end dancing in the wind like an accusation. When I woke in the hospital, everything was too bright, too sharp. Machines beeped steadily beside me. My leg felt like it was simultaneously on fire and encased in ice. A doctor with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair told me I'd been in surgery for 11 hours. "The steel beam crushed your femur and shattered your hip socket," she explained. "We've inserted titanium pins to stabilize the fractures. You'll need at least one more surgery, possibly 2. The job site," I mumbled through dry lips. "Anyone else hurt?" "No, you were the only one injured." She squeezed my hand. "Try to rest now." But rest wouldn't come. Pain medication dulled the physical agony, but my mind raced with questions. How had this happened? The site had passed inspection just last week. I'd personally reviewed the equipment logs. On my 3rd day in the hospital, Owen, our project coordinator, visited. He brought yellow daisies and looked everywhere but at my elevated, heavily bandaged leg. "Team misses you," he said, setting the flowers on the windowsill. "They're all pulling extra shifts to keep us on schedule." All except Diane, I'm guessing. Diane Keller, senior structural engineer, my direct supervisor. We'd worked together on 3 previous projects. She'd been with Landmark Construction for 8 years while I joined barely a year ago. Owen's face changed, something guarded slipping into place. "Actually, she quit." The words didn't make sense at first. "Quit? When?" "Day after your accident." He fiddled with the flower arrangement, rearranging stems that didn't need rearranging. "That doesn't make any sense. She was up for site manager next month. Why would she leave now?" Owen shrugged, still not meeting my eyes. "Budget cuts. Restructuring. You know how it goes in this industry." I'd worked construction long enough to know when someone was feeding me a line. "Owen." He finally looked at me, his expression unreadable. "That's all I can say, Tess. Company policy. Since when does Landmark have a policy about discussing why people quit? I should let you rest." He backed toward the door. "Text if you need anything. We're all rooting for you." After he left, I stared at the ceiling, counting the tiles until my next pain medication dose. Something wasn't right. Diane wasn't just any employee. She practically ran the practical side of operations, knew every supplier and subcontractor by name. People like her don't walk away from 8 years of seniority overnight. The second surgery came and went. Physical therapy began, agonizing sessions that left me drenched in sweat and fighting tears. Through it all, the question of Diane's sudden departure gnawed at me. When I called coworkers from my hospital bed, they were supportive but evasive. Conversations flowed until I mentioned Diane. Then suddenly, they remembered appointments or needed to get back to work. Even my closest work friend, Zoe, changed the subject when I pressed for details. "It's complicated, Tess," she said. "Legal stuff. Nobody's supposed to talk about it." "Legal? Was she fired?" "I've already said too much. Focus on getting better, okay?" 6 weeks after the accident, I was released from the hospital with a walker, prescription pain meds, and twice-weekly physical therapy appointments. My apartment, a 3rd-floor walk-up, was now inaccessible, so my brother Patrick invited me to stay at his place. I was sitting on Patrick's porch, leg propped on a cushion, when the email arrived. No subject line, no message text, just a video attachment from an address I didn't recognize. Anonymous 7762 at protonmail.com. My thumb hovered over the delete button, probably spam, but something made me hesitate. I tapped to download the file instead. The video began playing. Grainy footage showed our construction site from an elevated angle, possibly from one of the temporary offices overlooking the foundation work. The timestamp in the corner showed a date 3 days before my accident. A figure walked into frame, moving with purpose toward the main crane. Even with the mediocre video quality, I recognized Diane's distinctive walk. The way she always moved like she owned every inch of space she occupied. She glanced around furtively, then pulled something from her pocket, a small tool, and began working on a connection point where the crane's cable was secured. My heart hammered against my ribs. She appeared to be loosening something, checking her watch occasionally as she worked. After several minutes, she stepped back, surveyed her handiwork, and walked briskly away. The video jumped to a new scene, inside the site manager's office. Diane and our boss, Jeffrey. "I've been here 8 years, she hissed, palms flat on his desk. "That promotion was promised to me, not some newcomer." Jeffrey looked exhausted, running a hand through his thinning hair. "The decision's been made, Diane. She has specialized experience we need for the downtown project. She's been here barely a year." My breath caught. They were talking about me. The downtown revitalization project, a contract worth millions, needed someone with experience in historical preservation construction. Before Landmark, I'd spent 5 years specializing in exactly that. The video continued, showing more clips of Diane at my workstation when no one else was around, misplacing my calculation sheets, switching labels on material samples, small sabotages that I'd attributed to job site chaos or my own oversight. Each incident grew more dangerous, tools placed precariously where they might fall, safety equipment moved from where I'd left it, culminating with the crane cable. I watched the footage 3 times, my body alternating between ice-cold shock and burning rage. Diane had tried to kill me, over a promotion. If you're still with me on this wild ride, hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. I promise, what happens next left everyone at the construction site speechless. Let me back up and introduce myself properly. I'm Tess Emery, 32 years old, structural engineer, specializing in historical preservation projects. I'd spent my 20s restoring crumbling landmarks across the Northeast, breathing new life into buildings most developers would have demolished. My greatest achievement had been reinforcing the foundation of a 150-year-old library without disturbing a single original stone. When Landmark Construction won the bid for downtown's Heritage Square revitalization, they headhunted me aggressively. The salary was double what I'd been making, with promises of advancement. I'd hesitated to leave my boutique restoration firm, but the chance to work on a project of that magnitude was irresistible. From day one, Diane had been coldly professional, not friendly, not hostile, just efficient. She assigned me increasingly complex tasks, which I'd assumed was her way of testing my capabilities. Now I understood she'd been setting me up to fail, hoping I'd make a mistake that would prove I wasn't qualified for the position they'd brought me in to fill. But I didn't fail. Every challenge she threw my way, I met and exceeded. Unknown to me, this had only fueled her resentment. I called the police immediately after watching the video. 2 officers arrived at Patrick's house within the hour. They viewed the footage, took my statement, and promised to investigate. "This is serious," said Officer Lynn, the older of the 2. "Tampering with equipment on a construction site is a felony." "She tried to kill me," I said, my voice shaking. The younger officer looked uncomfortable. "The video shows tampering, yes, but proving intent to cause serious bodily harm versus creating a dangerous situation is legally complex. She loosened a crane cable that dropped 300 pounds of steel on me. We'll need to identify who recorded this footage," Officer Lynn said. "Anonymous digital evidence is problematic in court. Do you have any idea who might have sent this?" I shook my head. In the following days, I forwarded the email to the police, who tried to trace it without success. The video had been carefully stripped of identifying metadata. 2 weeks later, I met with Detective Walsh at the precinct. Her expression told me everything before she spoke. "The district attorney doesn't believe we have enough for criminal charges," she said. "Without the original footage and witness testimony about who recorded it, there are too many evidentiary issues. What about the tampering itself? You can see her doing it." We questioned Miss Keller. She claims she was tightening the coupling, not loosening it. Without the original unedited footage, we can't definitively prove otherwise. And the other sabotage incidents? Minor enough to be explained as workplace disorganization. She looked genuinely apologetic. "I believe you, Miss Emery, but belief isn't enough for charges." I left the police station feeling hollow. That afternoon, a representative from Landmark Construction called. "We'd like to offer a settlement," he said smoothly. "Medical expenses plus 12 months' salary. We'll need you to sign a confidentiality agreement, of course. You know what happened, don't you? You've seen the video." A pause. "We're offering this settlement without any admission of liability. It's generous under the circumstances." "Where is Diane working now?" Another pause. "I'm not at liberty to discuss former employees." I hung up and called my friend Zoe. This time, I didn't ask about Diane directly. "How's the Heritage Square project coming along?" I kept my tone casual. "Delayed. They brought in some consultant from headquarters who doesn't understand the first thing about historical integration." She lowered her voice. "Everyone misses you. It's not the same. Any other staff changes I should know about?" Zoe hesitated. "Not officially, but rumor has it they're eliminating the site manager position entirely. Restructuring, they call it." That night, I couldn't sleep. The settlement offer felt like a bribe to keep quiet. The justice system had failed me. And somewhere out there, Diane was probably already working at another construction company, potentially putting other lives at risk. I stared at the ceiling, my damaged leg throbbing despite the medication. There had to be a way to prove what she'd done, to make sure she couldn't hurt anyone else. An idea began to form. Dangerous, possibly illegal, but potentially effective. If the system wouldn't hold Diane accountable, perhaps I needed to create my own system. The next morning, I called Landmark's Human Resources Department. "I'm considering your settlement offer," I said to the representative. "But before I decide, I'd like copies of all safety inspection records for the 3 months prior to my accident. For my peace of mind." That's not standard procedure for settlements. Neither is having an employee deliberately cause a life-threatening accident. "The records, please," as is my right under workplace safety regulations. 3 days later, a thick envelope arrived. As I spread the documents across Patrick's dining table, I felt a surge of determination replace my helplessness. "What exactly are you looking for?" Patrick asked, watching me organize papers into chronological piles. I held up a safety checklist from the week before my accident. At the bottom, Diane's signature, certifying all equipment, including the crane, had been inspected and was operating within safety parameters. "Evidence," I said, "and leverage." My brother stared at the signature, brow furrowed. "What does this prove? That she did her job? That she falsified safety documents?" I corrected, tapping the inspection form. "She certified this equipment as safe 3 days after I now have video evidence of her tampering with it." I spent the next week digging through every document, building a timeline. Patrick helped, though he grew increasingly concerned about my obsession. "Tess, maybe you should accept the settlement," he suggested one night. "Focus on healing. Let this go." I looked up from my papers, incredulous. "Let it go? I'm learning to walk again because of what she did." "I know, and it's horrible. But this," he gestured at the sprawling investigation across his dining room. "This is consuming you." Perhaps he was right, but I couldn't stop. Not yet. The documents revealed a pattern. Every safety inspection had been signed by 2 people, the inspector and a supervising engineer. Most forms carried Diane's signature alongside various inspectors. She'd been the gatekeeper of safety for years. My next step required expert help. I contacted Miranda Chen, an industrial engineer I'd worked with on a previous restoration project. We met at a cafe near my physical therapy center, where I could elevate my leg discreetly. "This is a serious accusation," Miranda said after I explained the situation. "Construction equipment tampering isn't something people typically survive. The police won't pursue it without the source of the video. The company wants me to sign away my right to sue." Miranda studied the inspection documents. Modern cranes have sensor systems that record operational data, load weights, extension angles, cable tension. The manufacturer should have those records. Would they share them? Not voluntarily. But if you filed a formal complaint with the Construction Safety Board citing equipment failure, they'd be legally required to provide relevant data. That afternoon, I submitted a detailed complaint to the state's Construction Safety Board. I carefully avoided accusations against Diane, focusing instead on equipment failure and requesting an investigation into the crane's mechanical data. 2 weeks passed with no response. My physical therapy progressed to using crutches, each step an exercise in managing pain. Patrick continued to offer support, though his worried glances told me he feared I was chasing ghosts. Then, on a rainy Tuesday, I received a call from someone at the equipment manufacturer. "Miss Emery? This is Neil Porter from Precision Construction Equipment." "We've received a data request regarding the crane involved in your accident." My heart raced. Yes, I filed that request. I've been authorized to inform you that our sensors did detect abnormal stress patterns in the cable assembly 3 days before the failure. These patterns are consistent with manual tampering, not normal wear. I gripped my phone tighter. Would you be willing to put that in writing? A pause. Our legal department has concerns about potential liability. Of course they did. The manufacturer wouldn't want to admit their equipment could be easily sabotaged. I needed leverage. Mr. Porter, I understand your company's concern, but if this tampering hadn't been discovered, how many other construction workers might be at risk from similar sabotage? Wouldn't your company want to address any potential safety vulnerabilities? Another pause, longer this time. I'll speak with legal again. In the meantime, we're implementing additional tamper-evident seals on all our new equipment. A small victory, but not enough. I needed Diane's name formally connected to the tampering. My next call was to Landmark's safety compliance officer, a woman named Georgia, who'd always struck me as principled. I explained my suspicions carefully, emphasizing that I wasn't accusing the company of wrongdoing, only asking for help understanding what had happened. "I can't discuss an ongoing internal matter," Georgia said stiffly. "So there is an internal investigation?" I didn't say that. "Georgia, please. I nearly died. I just want to know why." A long silence followed. Then, "Check public records for recent applications to the state licensing board. That's all I can say." I thanked her and immediately searched the construction safety inspector licensing database. There it was. Diane had applied for certification with a company called Summit Construction in the neighboring state, just 2 weeks after my accident. She'd fled across state lines, likely hoping to outrun any potential investigation, but she'd made a critical mistake. By applying for a new license so quickly, she'd created a paper trail. I contacted the licensing board, explaining that I had evidence a safety inspector had falsified documents and potentially caused a life-threatening accident. They took my statement but seemed skeptical without hard evidence. "We need more than your word against hers," said the administrator. "I have video evidence of the tampering." "Obtained how? By whom? Was it legally recorded?" I had no answers that would satisfy them. My revenge plan was falling apart before it had truly begun. That night, I sank into despair. The pain in my leg seemed to intensify with my frustration. 3 months of my life had been stolen already. Years of physical therapy lay ahead, and Diane would simply move on, endangering others when things didn't go her way. I was about to give up when Patrick knocked on my door, holding his laptop. "I think I found something," he said, sitting beside me. "I've been searching social media for anyone who might have worked with Diane before Landmark." On screen was a private message from someone named Amber. "I saw your post asking about Diane Keller. We worked together at Riverside Construction 5 years ago. There was an incident. Call me." The next day, Amber and I spoke for over an hour. She described how a foreman had suffered a freak accident after selecting another engineer for a prestigious project instead of Diane. No one had suspected foul play at the time. "He fell from scaffolding that had passed inspection that morning," Amber explained. "Broke his back, never worked construction again." Did he ever suspect Diane? Not until after she left. Then he found a work glove with her distinctive keychain tag near where the scaffolding had been tampered with. But by then, she was already working at Landmark, and he had no real proof. I thanked Amber and asked if she knew of anyone else who might have similar experiences. She connected me with 2 more former coworkers of Diane's, each with stories of accidents that had occurred after professional disagreements with her. None had concrete evidence, but the pattern was unmistakable. I compiled everything: the video, the maintenance records, the sensor data, and statements from Diane's former colleagues. I sent the package to the licensing board, the police, and Landmark's legal department. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then, unexpectedly, I received a call from Neil Porter at the equipment manufacturer. "Miss Emery, our legal team has reconsidered your situation. The potential liability of knowing about a deliberate sabotage and not acting is greater than any risk from disclosure. We'd like to formally cooperate with your investigation." "What changed your mind?" "Let's just say someone in our upper management has a daughter in construction." Your story hit close to home. With the manufacturer's support, the licensing board reopened their investigation. The police still wouldn't file criminal charges, but the professional inquiry gained momentum. I was making progress when disaster struck. Patrick called me at physical therapy, his voice tight with concern. "Someone broke into the apartment while I was at work. They took your laptop and all the documents you've been collecting. My blood ran cold. All of them? Even the backup drive? Everything related to your case. Nothing else was touched. I knew immediately who was behind it. Diane must have learned about my investigation. She was eliminating evidence. When I arrived home, the apartment looked undisturbed except for my missing materials. The police took a report, but offered little hope of recovery. Professional job, the officer noted. No fingerprints, no forced entry. They knew exactly what they wanted. I sat on the couch, devastated. Months of work, gone. My chance at justice, evaporating. Then my phone buzzed with an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read simply, "Not everything is lost." I opened it to find a message from someone identifying themselves only as a friend at Landmark who believes you. "I've been quietly duplicating your evidence," the email read. "After what happened to you, I knew Diane might have allies willing to protect her. I have copies of everything, including the original video. Tell me where to send it." Hope flared again. I responded immediately with Patrick's email, more secure than my compromised account. Within hours, digital copies of all my evidence arrived. My anonymous ally had even included something I hadn't seen before: internal emails between Diane and the site supervisor discussing my inexperience and unsuitability for the downtown project. The timestamps showed these emails began the day after I was hired, long before she could have evaluated my work. Armed with restored evidence and new information, I contacted Summit Construction, where Diane now worked. "I'm calling about one of your recently hired engineers," I told the HR director, Diane Keller. "Miss Keller no longer works here," came the surprising response. "She left 2 weeks ago. May I ask why?" "Company policy prevents me from discussing personnel matters." She'd moved again. Perhaps she'd learned about my investigation and fled before I could connect her to Summit. But where had she gone? I posted in several construction industry forums, carefully worded to avoid legal issues, seeking contact information for engineer Diane Keller for important safety documentation matter. Within days, I received a private message. "Diane started at Western Regional Development last week. Safety Compliance Division." The irony was bitter. The woman who had deliberately caused my life-altering injury was now responsible for safety compliance at another company. I compiled my enhanced evidence package and sent it to Western Regional's executive team with a detailed cover letter explaining the investigation. I copied the state licensing board, the equipment manufacturer, and my lawyer. 3 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. "Miss Emery?" A deep voice, professional but hesitant. "This is Edward Winters, Chief Operations Officer at Western Regional Development. We need to talk about Diane Keller." My heart pounded so hard I could barely speak. "I'm listening." "She's been suspended pending investigation. The evidence you provided." He paused. "We've contacted the licensing board ourselves to verify your claims. And? They confirmed they're investigating similar allegations. Miss Emery, if what you've documented is accurate, this is deeply disturbing. We have protocols to prevent precisely this kind of situation." "So did Landmark," I said quietly. "She worked around them. We'd like you to meet with our security team. The implications for industry safety standards are significant." As I hung up, a notification appeared, an email from the licensing board. They'd scheduled a formal hearing regarding Diane's credentials. They were requesting my testimony. For the first time since the accident, I allowed myself to believe that justice might actually be possible. But I'd learned enough about Diane to know she wouldn't go down without a fight. She'd already shown she was willing to commit violence when cornered. That night, I woke to the sound of someone trying to open my bedroom window. Heart racing, I reached for my phone and silently dialed 911. Before I could speak, the window slid open. A shadowy figure began climbing through. I grabbed my crutch and swung it with all my strength. The crutch connected with something solid. There was a muffled grunt, then the sound of someone stumbling backward. Outside, I heard a thud and a pained curse. "Police are on their way," I shouted. Though I hadn't actually spoken to the 911 operator yet, I quickly whispered my emergency into the phone, giving them Patrick's address. Footsteps scrambled away outside. My hands shook as I turned on every light in the apartment and checked that Patrick, asleep in the next room, was unharmed. He woke disoriented but sprang into action when I explained what had happened. The police arrived within minutes. They found scuff marks beneath my window and a dropped cell phone on the ground below. The phone was locked, but the case had a distinctive scratch across the back, the same mark I'd noticed on a phone Diane had carried at the construction site. Can't prove it's hers without unlocking it, the officer said, but we'll process it for fingerprints. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The break-in confirmed what I'd feared. Diane knew I was building a case against her and was desperate enough to take direct action. What would she try next? The next morning, Patrick insisted we move to a hotel until the licensing board hearing. It's not safe here anymore, he said, packing my essential belongings. She's clearly willing to do whatever it takes to stop you. We checked into a mid-range hotel under Patrick's name, paying cash to avoid creating an electronic trail. I continued my physical therapy, always looking over my shoulder, jumping at unexpected sounds. A week before the hearing, I received a disturbing call from Western Regional Development. Miss Emery, I'm afraid we've hit a complication, Edward Winters said, his voice tight. Diane has retained legal counsel who is threatening to sue for defamation if we continue to cooperate with your claims. My stomach dropped. You're backing out? Not exactly. But our legal department is advising caution. The video evidence is problematic without establishing who recorded it. So you're choosing potential liability over actual safety? A heavy sigh came through the line. We're suspending her during our internal review, but we may need to limit our involvement in the licensing hearing. Another setback. It seemed every time I made progress, the system erected new barriers. The licensing board hearing was my last real chance at justice. 2 days later, Miranda called with news. The equipment manufacturer contacted me, she said. They've reviewed all the sensor data from similar cranes at other construction sites. They found 3 more instances of tampering with the same signature pattern as yours. Where? All at sites where Diane worked before Landmark. They're sending the data to the licensing board and reporting it to OSHA. A flicker of hope. Independent evidence of a pattern might be what we needed to overcome the questions about the video's source. The day of the hearing arrived with slate-gray skies and a biting wind. I entered the government building on crutches, Patrick beside me carrying my documentation. The boardroom was smaller than I'd imagined, with a long table where 5 stern-faced board members sat reviewing materials. Diane was already there, dressed in a conservative gray suit, her attorney whispering in her ear. She glanced up when I entered, her expression flat except for a momentary flash of something cold in her eyes. The hearing began formally, with the board chairwoman explaining the purpose, to determine if sufficient evidence existed to revoke Diane's engineering safety certification based on allegations of falsified documents and willful endangerment. Diane's attorney spoke first, painting her as a dedicated professional being targeted by a disgruntled colleague who'd received a promotion she coveted. Miss Keller has an unblemished 8-year record, he argued. The video evidence against her was obtained illegally and has been edited to create a false narrative. When my turn came, I spoke clearly despite my nerves. I detailed the inspection records showing Diane's signature certifying equipment she had tampered with. I presented the sensor data from the manufacturer showing patterns consistent with deliberate sabotage. This wasn't an isolated incident, I concluded. The manufacturer has identified similar tampering patterns at 3 other sites where Miss Keller worked. The board members listened attentively, occasionally asking pointed questions. The chairwoman seemed particularly interested in the timeline of events following my accident. Miss Keller, why did you resign immediately after Miss Emery's accident? She asked directly. Diane's composure slipped slightly. I received a better offer from Summit Construction. The timing was coincidental. Yet, you left Summit after only 3 weeks, correct? And then joined Western Regional? I found their corporate culture more aligned with my professional goals, Diane replied smoothly. The hearing stretched for hours. As it neared conclusion, I felt increasingly uncertain. The board seemed troubled by the evidence, but also concerned about procedural issues. Would it be enough? Then the boardroom door opened, and a man I didn't recognize entered. He spoke briefly to the board secretary, who passed a note to the chairwoman. She read it, her eyebrows rising slightly. We'll take a 30-minute recess, she announced. During the break, I paced the hallway, trying to manage my anxiety. Patrick brought me water and a sandwich I couldn't stomach. When we returned to the boardroom, I noticed a laptop had been set up at the end of the table. The chairwoman called the hearing back to order. We've received new evidence that the board needs to consider, she announced. A witness has come forward. The laptop screen flickered to life, showing a video conference connection. A face appeared, familiar, though I couldn't immediately place it. Please state your name for the record, the chairwoman requested. James Holden, the man said, former security contractor for Landmark Construction. I suddenly recognized him, one of the security guards who monitored the job site cameras. He had always been friendly, offering coffee when I arrived early for shifts. Mr. Holden, please explain your relationship to this case, the chairwoman prompted. I was responsible for security camera maintenance at the landmark site where Miss Emery was injured, he explained. During routine system checks, I observed Miss Keller's suspicious behavior around equipment. Diane's attorney interrupted. This testimony is irrelevant. Mr. Holden is no longer employed by Landmark and has no standing. I installed additional cameras, James continued firmly, off-network, after noticing equipment irregularities that coincided with Miss Keller's inspection rounds. The room fell silent. You recorded the video submitted as evidence? The chairwoman asked. Yes. I didn't come forward immediately because I wasn't supposed to install unauthorized cameras. I risked my job doing so, but after learning how serious Miss Emery's injuries were, I anonymously sent her the footage. Diane's face had drained of color. Her attorney whispered urgently to her. I have the original unedited footage, James added, and footage from multiple angles showing repeated tampering incidents. The board reviewed the new evidence while we waited outside. When we returned, the chairwoman's expression had hardened. Based on the testimony and evidence presented today, this board finds clear and convincing evidence that Diane Keller falsified safety documentation and willfully created hazardous conditions, she announced. Her engineering safety certification is hereby revoked, effective immediately. Additionally, we are referring this case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Diane stood abruptly. This is a setup, she hissed, glaring at me. You'll regret this. 2 security officers stepped forward as her attorney urged her to remain calm. They escorted her from the room while I sat, stunned by the sudden victory. Outside the hearing room, James waited. I approached him, still leaning on my crutch. Why didn't you come forward sooner? I asked. He looked down. Fear. I have a family to support. Landmark would have fired me for installing unauthorized cameras, even with good intentions. But I couldn't stay silent knowing she might hurt someone else. Thank you, I said simply, words inadequate for what his testimony meant. There's something else you should know, he added, lowering his voice. After reviewing all my footage, I found evidence of Diane tampering with equipment near other employees who challenged her. Nothing as serious as what happened to you, but the pattern was clear. I nodded, not surprised, but still disturbed by the confirmation. Are you submitting that evidence too? Already have, to OSHA and the district attorney. That night, while Patrick celebrated our victory with takeout and cheap champagne, I felt strangely hollow. The revocation of Diane's certification was significant, but would it truly stop her? She'd already demonstrated her willingness to operate outside the rules. My answer came 3 days later when the district attorney's office called. They were filing criminal charges against Diane: reckless endangerment, workplace sabotage, falsifying safety documents, and attempted breaking and entering. The fingerprints on the dropped phone matched hers, and James's additional footage provided damning evidence of premeditation. She was arrested that afternoon at a bus terminal, apparently planning to flee the state. The news carried her mugshot, her expression a mixture of fury and fear. I thought this would bring closure, but something still felt unfinished. Diane might serve time, but what about the system that had allowed her to endanger lives across multiple companies? What about the next person willing to risk others' safety for personal gain? That's when I realized what my true revenge needed to be. I declined Landmark's improved settlement offer. Instead, I contacted an old colleague who worked as a consultant for OSHA. I want to propose new safety protocols, I told her. Mandatory dual verification systems for all critical equipment inspections. Tamper, evidence seals on safety components. Anonymous reporting systems for workers who observe safety violations. That's ambitious, she replied. You'd need industry buy-in, not just regulatory approval. I know, and I need your help to make it happen. Over the next 6 months, as my physical therapy progressed from crutches to a cane, I developed the framework for what would become the Construction Safety Verification Protocol. I worked with equipment manufacturers to design tamper-resistant components. I collaborated with safety experts to create double-blind inspection procedures that would make it virtually impossible for one person to falsify documentation. When Diane's criminal trial began, I testified calmly, focusing on facts rather than emotion. She was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 7 years in prison. But by then, my focus had shifted entirely to prevention. The Construction Safety Verification Protocol was adopted first by Western Regional Development. Edward Winters had become a surprising ally after seeing the extent of the evidence against Diane. Other companies followed, particularly after the equipment manufacturer made compliance with the protocol a condition of their warranty coverage. 1 year after my accident, I stood without assistance at an industry conference, presenting the newly mandated safety systems to hundreds of construction professionals. My leg would never be fully healed. I would always walk with a slight limp, always feel the weather changing in the titanium pins, holding my bones together, but I had found purpose in my pain. Diane had tried to destroy me because I received an opportunity she believed belonged to her. In her twisted logic, my success meant her failure. But her actions had inadvertently launched me into a position of industry-wide influence that far exceeded the promotion she'd coveted. When Landmark approached me again, it wasn't with another settlement offer, but with a job proposal: safety compliance director for the entire company, including oversight of the downtown project that had started this whole nightmare. I accepted, with conditions. Every site would implement my protocols. Every employee would receive enhanced safety training. And most importantly, the company would establish a foundation, providing support for construction workers injured on the job. The day I returned to the downtown construction site, now walking with just a slight limp and a decorative cane, workers applauded. Many had contributed to the investigation, sharing their own observations of Diane's behavior once they understood what had happened. As I looked out over the half-completed structure that had nearly cost me my life, I felt no triumph over Diane's downfall. My revenge wasn't her imprisonment or professional destruction. It was ensuring that no one else would suffer as I had. Every worker who went home safely because of the protocols I'd created was a victory. Every company that adopted the standards was part of my revenge against a system that had valued expediency over safety. Diane had tried to kill me for a promotion. Instead, she'd given me a mission that would save countless lives. If you've stayed with me through this journey, you know true revenge isn't just about punishment, it's about transformation. Like this story, hit that subscribe button to hear more incredible true stories of resilience and justice. And drop a comment below if you've ever had to transform your pain into purpose. Sometimes our greatest strengths are forged in our darkest moments, and I'd love to hear how you've turned adversity into power.